Welcome to the All Out Leadership Podcast, hosted by Pastor Eric Lawson, where each episode is uniquely designed to help you live all out by bringing you practical leadership from a biblical perspective delivered in 10 minutes or less. So whether you're a business leader, serving in ministry, or simply looking to grow in your leadership, this podcast is for you. Before we dive into this week's topic, make sure to subscribe to the podcast and download the show notes at ericlawson.com/podcast. And while you're at it, feel free to share the content on social media. Now, let's join Pastor Eric for this week's conversation.
Welcome to another edition of the All Out Leadership Podcast. We're going to start a three-part series today, and we're going to entitle it Raving Fans. Years ago, I read a great book entitled Raving Fans, and it's such a great book on just helping you know how to connect with customers, with people that you're trying to reach, to help them truly be your greatest marketers because they're just excited about you, your product, your company, or what it is you have to offer. Now, several thousand years before that book came out, Jesus really modeled how to create raving fans. We see in Mark chapter 1, verse 40, "Now a leper came to him, imploring him, kneeling down to him, and saying to him, 'If you are willing, you can make me clean.' Then Jesus, moved with compassion, stretched out his hand and touched him. And he said to him, 'I'm willing, be cleansed.' And as soon as he had spoken, immediately the leprosy left him and he was clean." Now, there's a lot of implications here in this story of just who Jesus is. And I just want to highlight a couple of these and how they really translate into us as marketplace leaders or as church leaders or as managers on your job, and how we touch people, how we interact with people. And ultimately, the byproduct of that is they're excited about your church, they're excited about your product, they're excited about doing business with you for your company. So Jesus really broke a lot of rules inside of this story. It was actually forbidden for people to touch somebody with leprosy. They would become, contagious themselves. They would have to go into quarantine. This man actually kind of broke some rules because they actually had to maintain about a 100-yard distance between other people as lepers. They also had to cry out, "Unclean, unclean," whenever they were coming through. But we see this man in desperation falling at the feet of Jesus. What we see is Jesus meets the deepest need of this man's life. Now, we think the deepest need would be healing. This man probably thought the deepest need that he had was healing from leprosy. But what Jesus really did is he took it a step further and said, "I'm going to meet a greater need than just the healing. I'm going to heal your heart." Because if you've had leprosy your entire life, you've been rejected, you've been ostracized, or as long as you've had leprosy, you'd be separated from loved ones, from family. You wouldn't have a hug. You wouldn't have a touch. And statistics show that touch is one of the deepest needs of every human. In fact, if a baby is isolated and doesn't have touch, statistics show that many babies and infants have actually died just simply because they didn't have touch. And so the real question every human has, whether they articulate it or not, or know how to, is this: am I valuable? Do I matter? Is there any significance to me? And Jesus reaches out, goes across the rules, across the barriers to meet the deepest need in this man's life, and that is to say, you're valuable. How did he do that? He didn't say it with words. He said it with one of the most important things we all need, and that is touch. Jesus answers the deepest question we have: are we valuable? And that is, he wants to come inside of our life and touch us. What you'll find is one of the greatest ways to create raving fans in a church or your business, your company, is what are the meaningful touch points that you have that communicate they are valuable. Not because of what they do for you, but just simply because they have value. Lance Armstrong wrote a book. It's entitled "It's Not About the Bike." And it's a great title because we often get fixated on the bike when the real emphasis is this: it's not about the bike, it's about the person riding the bike. It's not about your product, it's not about your company, it's not about the sale, it's about the person on the other side of that and the value that they are. I love what Zig Ziglar said: if you'll help enough people get what they want, inevitably you'll get what you want. Take the focus off you, take the focus off us and what can this person do for us? How can they help us meet a quota? How can they help us meet some KPI? Onto how can we just communicate the value of who this person really is? I like what John Maxwell says. He said it's hard to make somebody feel like a somebody when inwardly they think you're a nobody. We can really tell when we're just a number, when we're just a statistic, when we're just an ends to the mean for a salesperson to meet a quota. And nobody likes that feeling. I mean, like we've all walked into a car lot and you just felt like you're fresh meat. Not every car lot's that way, but I'm just using that as an example. There's a furniture store in the area that when I need furniture, I actually go there because they have the best prices and their quality's pretty good. But I hate it. I hate the experience because they're on commission. So when you go in, you literally just see them lined up and you could see them just like ready to pounce. And then they're arguing over who gets who. And it's just like, oh, come on. I'm more than just a commission. I'm a human being. And nobody wants to just feel like that. And so what I love about Jesus is he really cares more about touch than he is talk. The second thing we see in Jesus is this: he's not afraid to touch the untouchable people. And so he really reaches over to go after that person that society would have said is worthless, is an outcast. Jesus, why waste your time? I like what the Lord told one pastor. And I forget what pastor it was because I think several pastors have just claimed the story for themselves. But anyway, maybe God said it to all of them. I don't know. But if you'll go after those that nobody else wants, inevitably I'll give you those everybody does want. And that church and those churches that have adopted that motto actually have seen great success because they simply just go after anybody and everybody that nobody else would want. And then ultimately, God brings people that, quote, people would want. If you go after the customers that a lot of people would just pass over, look over, the person who looks like, but they might not have a lot of money. They might not be a high net worth client. They might not have, enough money to close the deal. If you just treat them like $1 million, you'll be surprised. Maybe that person actually might have a net worth of $1 million. Statistics show an average millionaire actually doesn't look like a millionaire. If you've never read the book, The Rich Man, The Millionaire Next Door, highly recommend you read it because most millionaires actually don't act like millionaires. That's why they're actually millionaires. But when you're willing just to touch anybody, and you're just willing to treat everybody like $1 million, what you're ultimately going to find is you're going to reach a ton of people. And what we see in this story is this man became an incredibly outstanding raving fan. What we also see is Jesus gives us a message, and that is he values touch more than talk. Too many people are great at talk, but they're not great at touch. Research has shown that 90% of what we learn is visual and only 10% is auditory, meaning when you incorporate the sound, the senses of beyond sight, sight, sound, taste, touch, smell. That's what touch does. Touch goes into other sensory experiences. So Jesus goes in to go beyond talk and beyond, hey, I love you, man, to let me touch your life. And he touched that person. There was a greater learning level by him. U.S. Public Health Services of Audiovisual Facility didn't know there was such a thing. But anyway, they said this. They found that people, when they're taught only by words, their immediate recall is 70%, but 3 days later, it is only 10%. But if they're told and shown, the recall is 85%, but 3 days later, it does decrease, but it only decreases to 65%, meaning there's a greater retention by 55% if it moves beyond just hearing something to seeing, sensing, feeling something. So what do we see the results of Jesus touching this man? Mark 1:43. And Jesus, apparently he didn't read any marketing books because he breaks all the rules on marketing. I love that about Jesus. And he strictly warned him and sent him away at once and said, see that you say nothing to anyone, but go your way, show yourself to the priests, offer for your cleansing those things which Moses commanded as a testimony. However, the man went out and began to proclaim it freely and to spread the matter. And so Jesus could no longer openly enter the city, but was outside in deserted places, for they came to him from every direction. Do you want people to come to you, to fill your church, to fill your business from every direction? And this man went out and proclaimed it freely. You want some free marketing? Touch people. Show them that they matter, that it's more about them than it is your product or making a sale. If you care for people, ultimately, you're going to create a bunch of raving fans. Next week, I'm going to give you some practical steps from this story on how we can do just that.
Thank you for joining us on the All Out Leadership Podcast. We hope you gained new biblical insight that challenged you to grow in your leadership. If you've enjoyed this week's episode, we would love your help in getting the content out farther. You can help by subscribing to the podcast at ericlawson.com/podcast and telling others about it. Next week, Pastor Eric will be back with another episode. So until then, we hope you have a great week being an all-out leader.